does Bryan really need to know this? Am I acting in the best interest of not just Fusion Health, but am I acting as an extension to Bryan with each of their respective divisions? So it took me time and growth to really become comfortable with that. But I realized that I was going to be the bottleneck. I was the bottleneck, and I could not be it anymore. And I needed to kind of adopt these philosophies in order to continue sustainable growth.
Welcome to Growth Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow?
Do you have the time to think? Do you have the time to truly be the strategist for your company, be the visionary? Time to think is different for all of us. One of the problems that a lot of people have with time to think is they will put it on their calendar, they will have great intentions, but they will realize that email needs to be checked, or email needs to be responded to, or someone needs something, or there's something else that's more important. And so time to think tends to get pushed down the road or kicked down the road. And you end up not having time, and then you feel guilty for not having more time to think. And if you overfill your calendar with meetings and all of the stuff that's necessary for you to get the work done of a CEO, then you'll rarely make time to think unless you understand the value of it and you understand how important it is. This is part of the Optimize Your Time series. We're talking to CEOs of fast growth companies to talk about what has really moved the needle for them. Our guest today is the CEO of Fusion Health. It is Bryan Jakovcic. And Bryan talks about his improvements on his ability to do one-on-one meetings. Some of the details inside there are perfect for you if you want to have better one-on-one meetings, you want to lead your department heads, your executive team to that next level, and it will help you become and be seen as a better leader. The other piece to this in part 2, we do the coaching session where I've been doing this all month long, where I am diving into what's really going on here. Now, one of the things I will set this up with is Bryan was asked, what's the challenge? And I had to ask him 3 times. He's very tuned in to what he's doing next. He knows kind of what's going on, but I had to keep asking him because here's the issue. He could not put his finger on, and maybe it was a little bit of nervousness inside this, but I really was patient with him to do this because this is what it takes to be an executive coach, is figuring out what the real issue is. And the real issue is time to think. I opened up this episode with a little bit more about it, but inside our conversation, what we got really clear about was how he needed to put time on his schedule, what was really missing there, and just kind of connecting the dots on a few things, very simple things that would help him be a more visionary leader, be more strategic, and drive the business forward as a leader. So thanks for tuning in to this episode of Optimize Your Time here on Growth Think Tank. And here's Bryan. Bryan, how are you?
Good. How's it going, Gene? Good to see you again.
Excited to have you back on the podcast. This is your second time being on Growth Think Tank.
Yep. No, the first time was a great conversation, and I look forward to kind of picking up on that the second time around here today.
Well, we've got a different kind of approach today. We're going to dive into how to optimize your time as a CEO. You're as busy as any CEO I've ever seen. You've got acquisitions, you're adding to your team. You've got, integrating cultures. There's a whole bunch going on in your world. But before we jump into that, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about what is your world. So tell us about Fusion Health.
No, definitely. So Fusion Health is the largest provider and supplier of electronic health record solutions in the Department of Corrections, so your prisons and jails throughout the country. For the last 4 years, we've been named on Inc.'s list as one of the fastest growing private companies in America. And we are also one of the fast 50 here in the state of New Jersey. And I, as a leader, have grown this business from the ground up. We're roughly 100 employees based here in Woodbridge, New Jersey, with our new office in Topeka, Kansas through our acquisition. And I was just awarded one of the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year finalists for 2020.
That's impressive. When you went through that process for Ernst & Young, tell us a little bit about what they were looking at and how it worked out.
No, definitely. So my wife actually nominated me without me even knowing back in 2019. So at the time, I just thought it was one of those, nice to have kind of accolades to, if I were to even get it. I'd won the 40 under 40 awards here in New Jersey. And it wasn't until I really got into the process and started talking to people, just colleagues and so forth, that I really started to understand the magnitude of what I'd been nominated for. And the process was definitely long and arduous and detailed. And they did a great job with it. So again, I moved on from New Jersey and then went to the Nationals, which were roughly 2 or 3 weeks ago. And while I didn't win it, I was one of the finalists there. So definitely a big thing that I was happy about. But what they really looked at was not just myself as a leader. They looked at what I built and the company's philosophies, values, mission as a whole. And again, just the aspect of what Fusion Health is and how we contribute to an underserved market and largely forgotten about people that I think really kind of helped us move through the entire process.
I love that. I appreciate you sharing a little bit of that story with us. It goes back to prove too that the basics, the fundamentals are still very important. It's not just about putting money in the bank, but it's about creating a place that people love to come to work, actually making the impact in the world, which you're doing through the technologies and services you offer. So Bryan, I appreciate you sharing that with us. We are going to talk about optimizing your time.
My pleasure.
I've already had a chat with you about specifically what some of the things are that you have done to optimize your time as a CEO. It's a never-ending journey, but you put a spotlight on one piece of this that has made you a better leader. You remember what that was?
Yeah, no, it's definitely what I refer to as our HODs, or head of divisions. So on a weekly basis, I meet with each of the heads of my divisions throughout the company. And one thing I realized was I was going into these meetings and leaving the meetings without the information I really needed, and honestly bored. I realized that I should not be leaving the meetings that I've called on my heads. I shouldn't be leaving those meetings bored. I shouldn't be leaving those meetings without what I need to move on with my day and to run this company effectively. So, over the course, I'd say, of about a year, I really started to tweak and fine tune the meetings. And what I saw was that an hour wasn't really needed. I can get out of I can get what I needed in half an hour instead of an hour. And the way I did that was by creating a formal agenda that is actually embedded on our Confluence pages. So we use Atlassian Confluence here at Fusion instead of SharePoint, but it's relatively similar technology. And the direction I gave to my HODs was, I want this completed the day prior so that we can both review it, digest it, and walk into that meeting with the information questions already, at hand. So that really allowed us to move through the agenda, allowed us to skip through things on the agenda because the status updates were enough information I needed. But even moving through it, and over the past year, what I started to introduce also was KPIs in our HOD meetings. And at first, I put it right up on top at the forefront. And I even gave explicit instruction to my HODs and said, listen, we'll put the KPIs up there, but let's just look at them and kind of keep moving on. And what I realized is that it's people's just inherent nature to kind of look and review and just talk about what's in front of them no matter what. So again, we've been refining it over the past year, and about 2 months ago, I decided let's move those KPIs down to the bottom because they're just out of sight, out of mind, is at least as it pertains to the conversation, but they're still there in meaningful information that, again, if we're reviewing in advance, we can review them and just not necessarily not talk about them, but only talk about them if they're really, there's something critical that needs to be brought up.
Bryan, when you talked about that, I want to make sure it's very clear to those listening in. What are you doing in these one-on-one meetings with your HODs, your head of departments?
So I'm getting the information I need. We are moving at rocket speed, to say the least. So what I needed to have the information, the high-level information I could use to not only disseminate to the other HODs, but to also make sure that I'm understanding the big picture and I'm disseminating my big vision to the rest of the HODs so that we can keep moving forward nimbly. I realized that as we were growing, especially that, and especially as I took off the multiple hats I was wearing, that I couldn't afford the time to have the nitty-gritty of everything. I needed to have faith in my HODs to be able to know what would Bryan do. Does Bryan really need to know this? Am I acting in the best interest of not just Fusion Health, but am I acting as an extension to Bryan with each of their respective divisions? So it took me time and growth to really become comfortable with that. But I realized that I was going to be the bottleneck. I was the bottleneck, and I could not be it anymore. And I needed to kind of adopt these philosophies in order to continue sustainable growth.
Here's a real key question for you, and you can explain this any way you want to. How much time would you guess that you spend talking versus they spend talking?
I'd say I do probably about 15 to 20% talking. They do the rest. I'll drive specific questions, but they also understand at this point, what is the information that Bryan needs to know? So we're walking in, and truthfully, I walk in and they're already ready, locked and loaded, ready to go. I sit down in my office here, which is really the only time I'm ever in it. Sit down, and you can see the screen right behind me. They do screen sharing with ClickShare, and it's up on the screen, and we roll right into it. I'll usually walk in with my notepad and my blue pen, and that we're off to the races.
That's a very different structure than what most leaders do. I find that a lot of Inc. leaders like yourself, who are tuned into leadership and empowering others, don't feel like they need to talk as much. Was that adjustment over the years, or is that just something that was natural to you?
I realized that if I was doing all the talking, that my what I said lost value. So I guess it might be a maturity thing, growth as a professional thing. But I realized that my words need to be impactful, especially as we grow as a company. I'm definitely out there goofing with guys, friendly. Nobody's going to say, "Oh, Bryan's that guy who doesn't talk," or "He's very, stern, and we can't have a conversation with him." But when it comes to key decision makings and talking out in conversations, I do tend to be the quieter one in the room, so I can absorb as much as possible, digest that information, kind of calculate in my head, and then actually give direction. One thing I've also realized and learned over my growth is that when I give direction, I need to be very concise and clear that this is direction that I'm giving. I was listening to one of the podcasts, and listening and hearing that an executive was confused as to why one of his employees, one of his subordinates, did something, and he said it in passing, where almost jokingly, you should go do that. And that person actually went out and did that, even though the owner did not necessarily intend for that to happen. So that's one thing I've learned, is that if I'm given direction, I'm very explicit in saying, here's what we're going to do. This is what I'm understanding, and those key words really act as triggers in people's mind to remember this is what we're doing. And it also affirms that they completely digested and understood and accept what we're doing.
How many of those meetings are you having each week?
I'm asked to count this frequently, but I'd say it's probably about 9 or 10, 8 or 9, 9 to 10, something like that.
And when you have to cancel them, how do you handle that?
So what I actually do is we have our administration meetings on Wednesday afternoon at 2:00. And even that, we've actually been able to hugely streamline through building out agendas by getting them in ahead of time, kind of taking the HOD concept and moving it to the entire board. So we do that exact same thing. So that's on Wednesday afternoon. Monday and Tuesdays are my HOD days, except for finance and the physical plant, the building and office and so forth. Those two I do on Thursdays. But my other HODs, I have at the exact same times on Monday and Tuesday, and I have time blocks scheduled on each person's opposing day. So if somebody's on a Monday, I could pull them to Tuesday, move the Tuesday person to Monday, and it's absolutely seamless. So again, because of the intensity of the meetings and how short they are by design, it's very easy to slam in 30 minutes in somebody's day. Even in the worst case situation, have to take their lunch, rather than these marathon meetings of an hour plus.
Well, I appreciate you walking us through that. I think there's a lot to be gained from this, and so I really appreciate it. Before we move on, I know that you've shortened the meetings from 30 minutes from 60 minutes. But how has it really impacted your overall time? What's the quick version of that?
So one thing I realized is that, and maybe it's because I'm getting a little older, I don't know, but I need time to digest. I had this picture and vision in my mind, and maybe it's because my daughter loves watching the show and movie Boss Baby, where Boss Baby CEO is walking down the aisle and everybody's circling around them, handing them paper, sipping the coffee mug, the million things are going on. Even before she started watching that was always kind of the idea of like, wow, when I'm that busy, that's when I'm really successful. And I realized that what I need to do is actually take time to digest what's just happened so I can make the next corrective action. So even Gene, I mentioned that we're doing 30-minute meetings. That's actually gone down from 45 that started at an hour. So I realized even that 45-minute meeting didn't allow me the time to actually document and think it through and even go back and go to the bathroom. I was going marathon meeting back to back to back to back. So one thing I started having my admin do was do not do back-to-back consecutive meetings, like more fit, like actually thinking meetings. I have the 30-minute meeting, I have a 30-minute block. I have a 30-minute meeting, I have a 30-minute block. So that allows me to end the meeting, jot down some notes, even complete the things that I promised that person I would complete. Because what I started to get into is a cycle of meeting. I'll get this to you next week. I'll get this to you next week. I'll get this to you next week. But when your entire week is nothing but meetings and you can't actually work, you're failing the people you've promised to do things. So now you have to take a step back and say, okay, am I going to impact my personal life, which I value dearly? You know, I have 2 kids, a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. Been married 5 years. I'm still in that part of my life. And I want to be part of my family. And what we're talking about here is even Fusion Health. This is all about Fusion Health. This is not even talking about the other businesses that I have. So again, my life is full of things to get done. And that's what I realized is that I just need to structure my life in a way to achieve these things. And that this is just something that's worked for me personally.
All right, hold on for a second. Before we go into part 2 in the coaching section of this interview, I want to talk about what we just heard inside of part 1. I've been asking CEOs about what has been the key to them optimizing their time, what moves the needle. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up to you is the 3 things I took notes on that you could learn from here, and just put a moment for you to pause and think about, are you doing this well enough? The first one is really about asking your one-on-one employees to come to the meeting prepared, with an agenda. And that sounds so basic, but isn't it pretty important for you to have them create the agenda? Instead of you creating it, they create it. And it's a set template, so it's pretty easy. You put some rules around it, like I want to get it 24 hours ahead of time so that I can digest it and I can come prepared for that meeting. What does that signal to that employee? They get their issues heard. It also signals that you want to give them the best of you, not just show up and be reactive to that. You're being very intentional about it. So I love that. A big key to that is them owning the issues, them owning the agenda. They own what goes in there. You don't own it, they own it. And if you have that as kind of a rule that you put in place, then you will have a better kind of experience with your one-on-one meetings with your employees. I found that to be very impactful in my own business and my clients' businesses. So I'd love for you to look at that. The third thing I want to put a spotlight on is, and it's very basic, is the back-to-back meeting myth. And that back-to-back meeting myth is so prevalent. I've had it happen to me before, and back-to-back meetings don't give you time for bio breaks, don't give you time for jotting down notes, don't give you time to do anything. But what if you had enough space in between your key meetings, and every meeting may have a different kind of requirement. At the end of my podcast episodes, I take 15 minutes to record these issues for you. And so I'm just putting a spotlight on this for you, is what is your rule around back-to-back meetings? And what do you use that time for? What Bryan said is he likes to take notes, but he also likes to go ahead and do the things that he said he would do. So maybe it's send another email, maybe it's make an introduction, whatever it is, he goes ahead and does it. So he doesn't have a backlog of these things. Love this idea. I just wanted you to understand, to be intentional about what to get out of this episode. Now, going into episode 2, I know we're going to be talking about time to think. It took us a little bit of time to get into that, but it really is a powerful conversation. What we end up with is very simple and basic. It's, executive coaching is not always the big strategic issues. Many times it is. Many times it's the big ideas. But sometimes, like today, it's just the small things that you can do to feel more in control of your time and play at the highest level possible. Create specific rules around your time that allow you to be the leader that you want to be. Now, here's the second part of the interview with Bryan. I'm scrolling down notes here because this is just brilliant. Mm-hmm. I really appreciate you sharing that with us, Bryan. I know that you're always in a place of involvement. And so as a leader, when you think about your time, what is the one thing that you're working on right now that will improve the way you lead and use your time for the most valuable things?
Sure. So one of the things that we're really working on right now with our HODs, and this is the first time we're doing it, is actually taking a step back and actually figuring out what we want to get done in 2021. This past year, everybody's saying obviously has been one for the books. Nobody ever thought that this was coming. But again, looking back, and as I mentioned at the open, we've been four times listed as one of the fastest growing private companies in America. And what's crazy is that at the end of every year, at the beginning of every time we move to a new office, we kind of like laughed a little bit saying, oh, we're never going to fill this space. Can it ever be that kind of year again? So we never planned for the next year. We just pretty much held onto our butt cheeks and hoped for the best. And that was it. And now after 4 years of doing this, it really has settled in with us that this is happening. This is going. Next year, in theory, will be a much better year than 2020. Frankly, 2020 was pretty much flat for us. So, next year we have a lot of things in the pipeline. We're hopefully going to close on a couple more states that should have closed this year, but that's where we're going. But again, we're taking the time to say, okay, knowing what we know, knowing where we want to go, putting a strategy together and putting our priority list together is the focus. And that's something that we're working on right now. So this is the first for us. We're doing it. I have high expectation that it will work. And we're actually using the priorities for each of the HODs as their incentive for financial compensation in the upcoming year. So it should be really, really exciting.
So Bryan, I want to go back and kind of clarify the issue. Is there a challenge that you're working on with your time? Like, are you spending too much time doing something that you want to stop doing? Or I know we had talked before about something you want to do with your leadership capabilities around fulfillment and growth of the individuals. So what's the real challenge with your time right now?
It is two parts. One is, developing knowledge and actually pushing my HODs to become more managerial like. One of the things here at Fusion is that all my HODs effectively have been here since day one. We only have one outsider that came from McKinsey, one of my HODs at least. So again, we've all grown internally in a silo. And one of the challenges I have for all of them is to professionally develop themselves in the upcoming year. I think that's really important because that's how you become a level 5, a level 10. That's why I want my guys to become. I don't want them just to be complacent because heck, it worked while we got here. Well, heck, it's been working, but last year we had half the staff. The year before that, we had half the staff. We are growing as a company. We are growing in complexity. We are even diversifying in the businesses that we are operating. And I expect those HODs to be able to be rock stars as we continue to grow. So that's one of the big things that I challenge them all to do. When you look at my time, there's always so much time in a day, and that's something that I'm just having to accept. Especially as we've grown, it's become this difficult thing in a way where people appreciate Bryan because I'm out there rolling up my sleeves. I'm out there in the server cage. I'm out there with the guys, just doing whatever needs to get done. And it's a little painful in a way that I've had to realize that I can't just go out there. I can't be feeling bored and just go out there and kind of, screw around with computers with the IT team. I can't do that anymore. I mean, it's just this reality of it. So I need to be structured and disciplined in my time, and even structured and disciplined in my creative time. I used to be able to say, hey, let me go crash on the couch or something and just figure things out. Let me go think. And I realized I've had to kind of work that around differently. But one of the things I'm thankful for at least is that I think best in the car. So, and this, we were even chatting about it. This is how you listen to your podcast, other podcasts. I have that hour in the morning and I have that hour in the afternoon going home. And rather than just listening to the same old country music over and over again, let me better myself. Let me use that time wisely. And, either making my thinking time or making my learning time. And that's something that I've even kind of told my HODs, like, hey guys, why don't you try this because it's working for me. That's another thing also is I'm expressing myself more of, guys, this is what I'm doing to make myself better. Try it. It works. And it's amazing the impact you could have on the people nearest to you and the people that you want to entrust in helping you run your company. Because the more and more they could act in your image and thought process, the better you're going to be and the quicker you're going to be able to streamline and scale.
So I appreciate the context there, but I want to kind of get to the heart of this. What do you want to be different as it relates to your time in 2021?
It's third time asking the question almost. I have to hit this on the head now. What do I want to...
Give me the short version. Like, what do you want to be different? Do you want more time to think? Do you want more time to lead people? What do you want more time to do?
I would say think. Definitely think.
Okay.
For the short of it is that especially as we've grown, I feel like it used to come at me when I didn't even expect it, and now, especially as I've tried to restructure some of my time, and we've spoken about this before. I remember times where I had time, and this is recently, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I had to go down, winterize the beach house, and I took care of it in like half an hour. I blocked out the entire morning. I got to the office, I sat down, and I said, "Wow, I'm going to be super productive today." And the thing is that I was not geared, and I couldn't be productive. The first half an hour, I sat there thinking about how to be productive, and then I didn't know what to be productive on. And then, all of a sudden, somebody calls me up, and then the whole morning's gone, and I wound up losing it. I might as well have been out of the office and just got some time off. So that's one of the things, is that I need to definitely get more time to think, but I also need to structure that. The productivity time, I think, is one of the big things I need to work on, honestly.
Well, I'm going to help you understand something, because I look at these differently. Being productive and time to think are kind of different. Productive to me is I've got a list of 3 or 4 things I need to get done. I did them. I can mark them off my list. It feels good to scratch through them. Even though I have an iPad, I still scratch through this list of things. But time to think it's hard to look back on that and say, you know what, I really got a lot done today, because you were thinking. Like, there's no productive, you can't go back and see it. Like when you were deciding to acquire a company, there was probably a lot of task that you had to do once you made the decision, but the decision to acquire that company, it probably took a lot of time to think. Is that fair to say?
No, absolutely. Frankly, I did very little work when it came to that.
Okay.
Acquiring a company, that was some experience, and honestly, I could not have done that. I could not have done that without my team. I mean, we hired an M&A consultant. My director of finance. Go ahead. Sorry.
I don't want to go off into the tangent. I was just using that as an example.
Sure.
Being productive is different than time to think. Do you see that?
No, absolutely.
What would you do with the time to think if you had more of it? Let's say you had a half a day, 4 or 5 hours a week to think. What would you do with that time?
So as an entrepreneur, I guess I agree with you in that thinking and productivity are different. But I think as an entrepreneur and in a way, an innovator, I think that they're loosely coupled in my mind almost.
Okay.
Where you're thinking, but in my mind, I often term myself as a builder. I like to build things. So even in thinking, I am producing the skeleton, if you will, of what to move on next. So yes, when I thought to acquire, I thought it through. I went through the maze. I wrote some things down. I even did the basic framework of it. Here's our Confluence page where we're going to kind of put all the documents. Here's our JIRA. So I gave it to them and said, guys, we are going to go buy this company. You're going to do this. You're going to do this. I've set this up for you. March. And so
let me stop you there. I think that's a good example of time to think, because many times I'm thinking, I'm scratching out stuff. Mm-hmm. I'm planning for whatever the next quarter is next year, planning for another launch of something, a campaign, or how do I change the podcast? Like I sit back and think what needs to be different. So you do have some productive output from time to think, but if you in 2021 had more time to think, what would you spend it on?
What would I spend it on? This is a good question. If I had more time to think in 2021, what would I spend it on? I would be thinking on how to scale. I think would that work? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, let's get more specific. In scaling, is that integrating your product lines, adding new products, innovation of some sort? How do you think about scaling? Is it more people?
People is definitely part of it, but I'd say scaling more so in the operating sense of it. Right now the acquisition allowed us to bring a lot of talent in. So we have a lot more human capital than we had before, but the way that they were structured was effectively incompatible with how we operated, where their applications, each application was its own mini company. So and we are in the process of implementing a shared services organization, which again shares resources. So scaling in that regard is something that I've spent a lot of time on. I think I definitely would love to spend more time on, is not just figuring out how to do that, because I'm pretty much there. It's figuring out how to implement that. Building that skeleton, if, like I mentioned earlier, where guys, here's how we're going to actually actuate this plan to integrate the team that we just acquired into our organization, so we can continue to scale, build quicker, build faster, and take up additional market share. So I think that is where I'm kind of at, even in my business development cycle. Is once I figure out this, definitely going to put a retrospective together, document this all down for the next step to actually have effectively a blueprint for Fusion of how do we go and acquire businesses, integrate them, and continue towards world domination.
How important is scaling in 2021 to the business?
Huge. I already have a next target in sight. So I know what I want to do, and I know what time, when the exact timing should be. But again, I would be foolish in where we are today to act on that. So without integrating and completing that and scaling and figuring out how to scale, I can't go to the next step.
I appreciate you saying that. So you would spend your time on scaling. It's hugely important to the success of the business and where it's going and the impact you want to make. Here's another question for you. If you're not doing that thinking to scale, who's doing it for you and your team?
I'd say
I know you've got some high-powered intellectual people, but who's doing it besides you?
So so my brother oversees our business development team. He's EVP for business development. He definitely does some of that, but he doesn't think on the scaling side. He's more the idea guy.
Okay.
Frankly, my COO Eli, he's been with me from the beginning. He kind of will take it to a certain point, but frankly, I mean, yes, I'm going to say yes to the fact that if I'm not doing it, nobody's doing it.
Let me take a second here to remind you that if you want to keep getting episodes like this, you want to evolve as a leader, then you want to make sure you go to genehammett.com/subscribe. genehammett.com is my home base. The podcast is Growth Think Tank. And if you want to be a visionary leader, if you want to keep learning from all of these amazing founder CEOs, then go to genehammett.com/subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Okay. And this is very common. We don't have the luxury of having, someone that we can go, outsource our thinking to as CEOs and visionaries. Frankly, I don't know if you want to, because what you saw as an opportunity years ago, no one else would have seen, or else they would have done it and beat you to it. You saw something that the others didn't.
No, you're absolutely right, Gene. I mean, yes, I as the founder, owner, head of this business needs to think about where we are going to go next and how we're going to do it. That's why I'm here. That's a value I bring to the company.
Which is very different than I've got 3 things I need to do because I told someone I would send them something, right? Or it's also very different, just happens to be, it's still important to do the one-on-one meetings like we talked about earlier, but it's different than time to think, right?
Definitely.
So if we've established what you would do with it, we established that it's very important. We established that no one else is doing it for you. Is it still a struggle to keep it on your calendar in a place where it happens on a consistent basis?
Should it be, or is it?
Is it still important? Still a struggle?
Well, I know it shouldn't be, but it is a struggle at times. Yeah. Definitely. I mean,
I get it. Here's the thing. One of the pieces to this is, and I've talked about this in some of the previous Optimize Your Time episodes, so I'm kind of repeat myself a little bit, but I think it's helpful for everyone. Do you know when you do your best thinking, your most creative, your most energetic to a complex situation?
The morning.
Is it in the morning? Is it in the middle of the day, evening? What is it for you?
No, hands down the morning. I know it, and it's usually on that car ride in, probably about halfway down the highway. And I purposely live an hour away because I knew even when I bought the house that that's the time I need to get up and get thinking in the morning. If my wife dislikes it totally, but if I had a 5-minute commute, even if I worked my own, no way. I mean, here we are, 2020 in the pandemic. I'm still here in the office because I need that time. I can't even go into the office and we have a finished barn where I have my office. I can't even go in there. And it's even though it's a separate building and everybody would be out of my way, I as a person know what I need to do to be productive. And those are hands down the morning.
Here's the hard part, and I'm going to say this knowing that it might hurt me because I know you're an avid listener to the show and you listen to other podcasts. What if you didn't use that time to learn, but you use that time to actually think about the things that you need to do? Like somehow you had a routine of getting in the car, and that's when you thought about the next scaling up piece or the opportunities in front of you.
So I think I'm not going to have to hurt your feelings because I, as a person, I know that I can multitask in some capacity, and
Okay.
it's the inspiration of podcasts like yours that actually make me think. So I'll hear ideas or thought process that you guys have, and I'm like, that is it, But again, that might be leading me to think. It's not that silence thought where it's just I'm there plotting, by myself. So I actually think that the podcasts help.
I get that because I get the same thing too. I can listen to a podcast, read an article, read something out of a book and go, that's a piece of content I need to create with a different twist on it for my audience. But I will just ask the question again, like if you are doing that already, then why is it still a struggle? Because it wouldn't be a struggle if that was already working.
That is true. And I think it goes on, maybe it might go back to even earlier where we were talking about just having more time though, too, to actually do it. And so there's things still, I can see where you're coming from on that.
Here's the beautiful part. You already seen value by having space in your calendar. I wrote down there specifically in my notes. I realized that back-to-back meetings weren't working for me because I was making all these kind of promises and I was behind. And so I made a 30-minute buffer in between. That's what I heard, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And what if you just need certain buffers so that you're not overscheduled, so that you're really using that time to think and not just get things done, not just check your email, but using it to think. Does that sound like something you could do?
Definitely. And just even in thinking back at it, one of the things when it comes to time blocks and space and setting up your time is not to maybe just have it be blank. Even if I had to write something like, this goes back to even when I said I came back from the beach house early that morning, my calendar had nothing on it. So it was an infinite possibilities of what can I do with this box of time, and I did nothing. So maybe I do need to start putting in there think time, think. Yep. or 2021 strategy thought process or new product development thinking. Maybe that's something that if I put that on there, that can actually help me focus my thinking, because I think that might be actually one of the challenges that all of us might have, and so at least I do. Is you're told to think. Well, what am I thinking about? Am I thinking about going to the bathroom? Am I thinking about building an empire? Am I thinking about what I have to do this weekend? Lunch? What am I thinking of? And maybe that's something that I should.
I want to take that a little bit further with you because I think you're onto something. What I'm hearing you say, Bryan, is it would pay off because this is so important to the business, so important to everything. No one else is doing it. Going back to the things you've already said, but scheduling it on your calendar and titling it something that that's what you're supposed to be doing as opposed to checking email, right?
Yep.
Is an example.
Mm-hmm.
And inside there, we have the ability to write notes to ourselves. You could be, I'm going to say this knowing that maybe this is against the law, I think in New Jersey, but you could be doing voice to text. Is that okay with you in New Jersey? Voice to text?
Like text? Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
I just didn't want you to be texting while you're driving, but if you're driving in and you get an idea,
yeah, gotcha.
You drop into the meeting request a little bit of an outline. You voice to text, hey, got an idea, new acquisition. Let's look at how this product matches up with this project and see how much product is overlap. And that's what you do with your time of thinking. You put a little bit more detail in there so that when you look at it, you don't just, that's not important, I'll do something else. You already know what you're going to think about. Does that make sense?
That's a beautiful point. And it's kind of funny because that's so logical that I can't believe I don't do that. So if something pops in my head in the morning, I'll admit, I won't tell you where I'm at 6 o'clock in the morning, what part of the road, but I'll bust on my phone and try and type down a little note. Or, if I don't want to deal with it, the entire ride to the office, I'm trying to say, don't forget this, don't forget this, don't forget this. Yeah. And it pains me to say this, but I've definitely lost a few good ideas because I was trying to not forget it. And something distracted me and it just slipped my mind.
You're realizing behind this is voice to text could be a useful tool. I email myself. I know that maybe that sounds weird, but I email myself the workouts in the morning because I don't take a notebook. I just take my phone and I just pull it up and just go. But ideas, I email myself. And so you could either email yourself or you could put them actually in the meeting request, which I think is probably an even better way to do it. Because if you create an intentional time to think about scaling, that you already know what you're going to think about. So that's part of it. I saw the smile on your face on there when you're like, that's so simple. Did you feel that?
Yeah, no, it was, it's so simple.
I want to, as we wrap this up, Bryan, I appreciate you being here and play with me because this is kind of a coaching moment. And you were a little bit unsure about how this coaching moment would go. Like, has this been valuable for you?
No, definitely. I mean, all the conversations with you have been valuable, but no, this is definitely an interesting approach. And I definitely thought it was fruitful for me and hopefully maybe for some of the listeners as well.
Well, I saw the look on your face when you're like, that's so simple, and the big smile. So I want to make sure that you understand I wasn't here to dive deep into, the real issues of what's going on. I just wanted to find something that we could attach ourselves to help you move forward with more clarity. And hopefully, if you make this a habit and really commit to it, it's a small thing of just putting some time on your calendar. You think well in the morning. So maybe it's, the first 30 minutes or first, hour when you come into the office, instead of checking email, you actually get those time to think done.
No,
I
definitely.
bet you will get so much more intellectual creative power because you're doing it at a time that you already are playing at your best. You're not trying to fit it in around your meetings, right? That would be impossible almost.
No, definitely. You can't wind yourself down. It's just that is not possible. And even to your point, I'm thinking back now. Well, I don't have the thinking time block. I definitely have what I have on Monday mornings, which is my meeting prep time block.
Yeah.
And it's like the buzzer goes off. I see it on my calendar. I'm like, meeting prep time, pull up all the Confluence pages, start going through them, start going through and getting my picture together for my HODs. It's interesting how something that simple can be that powerful, I guess.
Here's the funny thing is I just had a conversation with someone yesterday where that was the one thing that we had to come up with setting up meeting prep time. So you figure that out. This is just another evolution in the step of you being a visionary CEO. So I appreciate you playing with me, Bryan. Thanks for being here on the podcast.
No, my pleasure, Gene, and always available when you want to go back on. So thanks.
So wrapping up this episode, I want you to really key into something that we talked about today. We talked about how to have better one-on-one meetings and how that relates to your time. And Bryan talked about some specific things he did. I got a little tongue-tied there, but it really is powerful when you start to look at if you could do something better and really being creative around that. But then the second piece I think was very helpful too, because he realized how important time to think is. No one else is doing it. He must be intentional about it. And he must fit it into a schedule and a time that is natural to his creative thinking time, which is in the morning for him, could be different for you. So all of these things are something you've learned to evolve as a CEO. If you have any more questions about your journey to being a visionary CEO, make sure you check out the free resources at Gene Hammett. You can listen to the podcast. When you think of growth and you think of leadership, think of Growth Think Tank. As always, lead with courage. We'll see you next time.